In today's video, we're going to talk about questions that I can't stand answering as an outdoor retailer. Hey everyone, Ghost Mooey here, and welcome back to my channel, Everyday Backpacker. For those of you that may not know, backpacking and backpacking gear isn't only just my hobby, it's also my profession, as I work full-time as an outdoor retailer for a locally owned and operated outdoor store here in Montana. And so today I thought I would share with you some of the questions that I don't actually hate receiving, a little bit of a clickbait title there, but questions that are often, very often asked of me that are asked in a way that expects a quick answer, and there simply isn't a quick answer to them. Now, I've spent a lot of time on gear forums online, and I know that inevitably when anybody ever brings up a store clerk at an outdoor store, you always see somebody commenting with the Ron Swanson meme that simply says, "I know more than you do." Now, in some cases, that's probably pretty true. However, in a lot of cases, it's not. I have definitely come across, usually in the larger stores, people who work there who clearly don't have a whole lot of experience. However, working at a small store, small stores' bread and butter are customer service and experience. And oftentimes the people you find working there are pretty well qualified. I was hired because part of my college degree was an emphasis on outdoor leadership. And so I actually, believe it or not, went to college to be able to do outdoor activities. And so I'm pretty well knowledgeable, and the people that I have the honor of working with are also some of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met in the fields of backpacking, cross-country skiing, bike packing, lots of different areas of expertise. So whenever possible, I highly recommend shopping local. I think the experience you get will be a lot more tailored to your needs, and it'll also help support the community. Now, the fact that I also work at a local shop is also the reason why I don't personally do affiliate links through my channel, because that would kind of defeat the purpose of supporting local. I don't typically get very political on this channel or take stances, but this is obviously something that I feel very strongly for, so thanks for coming to my TED Talk. And now on to the questions. Now clearly I can't speak for every single person that works in outdoor retail. This is just based off of my own experiences at the shop that I work at. And these are questions that come up fairly regularly. And as I said, I don't actually hate answering them. That's my job. I do customer service. So question number one is, which item is the best? People ask this because they've been taught by media and advertising to think that there are items that cost more that are clearly better than item B. And this isn't always the case. Now, in some cases it is. If you go to the grocery store and go look at the wine aisle, you have the wines at the top that have the fancy labels that are about $30, $40, $50 a bottle. Probably going to taste better than Bob's Red Blend down at the bottom for $2.95. However, when it comes to backpacking items, things are a little bit more nuanced than that. And the simple fact is everybody's goals and needs are different. And so an unscrupulous sales associate would probably just try to sell you the most expensive item they have, especially if they work on commission. And that's not going to be the right approach. For me, when people ask me that question, my response is usually, well, it depends on what you're looking to do with it. And it seems like a dumb answer, but the reality is that somebody who is going on a through hike, who wants ultralight equipment, who is really concerned about their bottom base weight, is going to have very different needs in an item than somebody who's just typically going out on a weekend, who's maybe a little bit rougher on their gear, who is looking for something that isn't necessarily the lightest, but may be a little bit more durable. And so again, there are certain nuances there that make that question really hard to answer. But at the end of the day, there really isn't much in the way of really best item, because again, your needs might be different from somebody else's needs. And that brings me to my second least favorite question, which is, what do you use? Oftentimes I have people ask me what gear I use, and I have a slightly snarky, admittedly candid answer to that, which is, I use the gear that works the best for me. And that's, again, a very valid point. I have spent many years backpacking and figuring out what items work the best for me and what I look for in gear And that has actually even evolved over the years. The stuff that I use now is dramatically different than the things that I used back when I started in the 90s. Sorry, cold. Getting over a cold. And this obviously kind of goes back to the previous question and the idea that everybody's needs are slightly a little bit different. I definitely wouldn't tell anybody that I've got everything figured out, because I don't. I'm still learning. It's part of the fun of backpacking, is figuring out those nuances. So again, don't try to compare your needs to the person who is trying to sell you the equipment just because you think that they may know really well. Now, if your needs are very similar to what the sales associate does, then absolutely that's a valid thing to ask. But again, if you ask me that question, I'm going to explain to you why it is that I use the item that I use, and it may not be exactly what you're looking for. The third and last question I'm going to talk about that I receive often is, how many boils can I get out of this? Again, you would think that it would be a pretty straightforward answer, and the reality is it's not. Anybody who has spent any time using one of these knows that there are a lot of factors that can affect the performance of the fuel canister. Stoves use a different amount of fuel depending on the stove. Wind can affect it. Weather can affect it. Temperature can affect it. Altitude can affect it. There's definitely a lot of things that go into it, and that is why it is really hard to find a general guideline on how much one of these canisters can produce for you. Now, some of the companies have definitely put things on there. For instance, JetBoil does have a graph on here that shows the percentage of fuel and the amount of boils that it can receive. However, they even put a disclaimer on them there. It says that maximum boil based on stove use and conditions. This is also based off of using a JetBoil stove. It's great if you have a JetBoil stove, but if you don't, it's going to be a little bit misleading. Now, what I typically advise customers, if they really want to know how much they're going to get out of the fuel canister for the stove that they have, is to simply buy the fuel canister and, under controlled conditions, boil the amount of water, say 2 cups, and see how many boils you get out of that. And then axe the last few to a nice round number. Say you get 16 boils, knock that back to 12 or 10, because you want to factor in that you're probably not at the same altitude, weather conditions, wind, etc. Give you a little bit of buffer zone. So I know, generally speaking, that I get 10 boils of 2 cups of water out of this particular stove. And then I can use that to factor in if I do 2 boils a day, 1 for dinner, 1 for breakfast. I know I can get about 5 days out of one of those fuel canisters. Probably have a little bit left over. When in doubt, always bring more. And over time, as you use a stove, you'll get a general idea of how much you need. When I first got my Pocket Rocket Deluxe, I carried 2 canisters in with me for a week-long trip. I didn't even make up the one, so I know I can generally get about a week's worth out of one of those smaller fuel canisters. That's with a pretty fuel-efficient stove, and results may vary. Now, if you want a really more scientific idea of how much your particular stove is going to use, I recommend going and looking at the literature put out by the manufacturer. For instance, if you go to most websites, they're going to talk for different stove manufacturers. They'll have information out there. For instance, just in a quick search, I found on MSR's web page, Stoves 101, how much fuel should I carry? And this is a pretty detailed breakdown of all their different stoves, what kind of fuel they use, and generally how much fuel it takes to boil X amount of water. So they definitely break it down into a much more detailed way of finding out than what I offer customers. So when in doubt, check out the internet. So that's just a quick glimpse in some of the questions that I get on a regular basis that I find more difficult to answer than most people are wanting me to give them. So an important rule of thumb for anybody who's spent any kind of time in the backcountry knows that there are no absolutes in backpacking. And thanks for watching. If you work in retail, what are some questions that you've got that you ought a little bit of a chuckle out? Leave those in the comments below, or if you're a customer who has had maybe an odd experience with an outdoor retailer, I'd be curious to see what those are as well, because frankly, I'm well aware that not everybody in the profession is as good as I am. Not even remotely true. I also wanted to thank you for sticking with me. I know it's been a little bit since my last video, but just like everybody else out there, life sometimes gets in the way of my backpacking schemes. And I was getting ready to go on a hike, and then sewage water started backing up into my shower. Priorities. Got to do a little bit of adulting. Then I had to cancel another backpacking or hiking trip due to the cold that I'm currently getting over. You might notice a little bit of a difference in my voice. Just like everybody else, sometimes life just says nope. Anyways, have a great rest of your day, and as always, keep hiking on.